mesenchymal cells, the stem cell, that can become all the cells of connective tissue, including fibroblasts, reticulocytes, chondroblasts, osteoblasts. All right? And then we have the fibroblast here. And again, look at the cytoplasmic organelles. If you see lots of rough ER, you know that that cell is producing things to pump outside of itself, right? And again, the fibroblast produces all of the extracellular matrix components. So, a shot of mesentery, which we know, again, this has just been laid on the slide. There's no section in here. We know that's what kind of connective tissue? Loose, all right? What's very easy to see are these very small, thin, branching elastic fibers. What's a little harder to see are the collagen fibers. And here, you get a sense that there might be one going like that. They're kind of in shadows. If you focus deeper, you might get a better focus on those collagen fibers. I find that it's best with mesentery to use a lower power. You can see here, higher power, something happening right there that could be collagen fiber. So you can see very nicely the elastic fiber. It's like a fibroblast right there. Okay, first thing, there's shrinkage artifacts here. All of these white cracks in real life don't exist. Okay, so you just get used to that. So seeing beyond that, what kind of connective tissue? Dense regular. I mean, you get the sense that everything, the fibers are running this way. You're absolutely right. So that's what H&E. If we do a Mallory trichrome, where you see that brilliant blue is technically correct. Where you see the bits of red is a technical failure. Right? So at any rate, it's clear that a Mallory trichrome identifies collagen. Okay? You may have trouble in an H&E section distinguishing collagen from smooth muscle. One way that you could get around that is use a trichrome. Another way is to cut your aperture diaphragm down. The collagen fibers are refractive. It kind of appears wavy, yellowish lines, right? Smooth muscle doesn't have that refractive property. So keep in mind that that aperture diaphragm, the one substage thing, is useful for trying to figure out whether you're looking at collagen or, for that matter, elastic lamellae in the aorta. Same song, second verse. Okay, silver stain of a lymph node. And we see up here, we've got what kind of connective tissue? It's the capsule of a lymph node. And our histofacts tell us that that's dense, irregular connective tissue. All right? You can see some lymph nodules here. And if we get down into the medullary region, clearer, at higher power, I think I've got a higher power. Here we have these beautiful, what kind of fibers? And there are what kind of collagen? Type 3. Okay? Remember, type 1, we looked at in tendon. Type 3 is reticular fibers. Type 2 forms fibrils that don't aggregate into fibers, and we find that in cartilage. Okay? And then remember, type 4 is what we see in the basal lamina. We'll hammer that home more and more as we go. So this is a shot of liver. And liver has reticular fibers, which you see outlined here. Okay, here's a shot of the wall of the dorsal aorta. The lumen is up here. One way of making sure you're looking at the lumen is to identify what kind of simple squamous cell that lines the luminal surfaces of blood vessel.
Simple.
Endothelium. Now, you may not always be successful because sometimes that layer it comes off very easily. But if you navigate along the luminal surface, chances are you're going to see that flattened nucleus of an endothelial cell. In 2 weeks, we'll be able to talk about the various regions of a blood vessel. But in this region called the media, or tunica media, we have lots of sheets
of elastin, elastic lamellae. Okay, so a nice example. Down here, we've got an adventitial surface, which says that this is a part of the aorta that's embedded in surrounding connective tissue, not exposed to a body cavity. If it were, it would be a... Come on, Ariana, it's on. Serosa. Good. Here are elastic lamellae. Same song, second verse, they just show up better. If you looked at this and shut your aperture diaphragm down, you'd be able to see those elastic lamellae. Okay? Here we see them, or get a sense of them, with an elastic stain. Yes, I mean, that's nice. I mean, kind of cool. Lots of little bubbles, empty bubbles. Keep in mind that the neutral lipids have been removed by the process of making this section, and all we see is this little thin cytoplasmic rim, which yes, this is a cool micrograph. Here note that the lipid is there. Here's this thin rim of cytoplasm. You see these droplets are either being extracted from the storage depot or added. I can't tell you which. Umbilical cord, all right? So a good example of where you might find mucous connective tissue, 2 arteries and the vein. And again, lots of open spaces there because that water, 70% water has been removed, all right? Okay, so that's connective tissue proper. Now we're moving into, obviously, cartilage. Again, shrinkage artifact. Here, mostly up in the perichondrium. Okay? So these spaces should not exist. Things should be flattened down. The outer layer of the perichondrium, if you flatten these, here you can see these flattened nuclei, is the fibrous layer. Okay? It's kind of, if you will, like the capsule surrounding cartilage. As you get down into here, this is the chondrogenic layer. This is the region that has chondroblasts that ultimately will pump themselves up, like these chondrocytes in their lacunae, and surround themselves with matrix. All right? That kind of growth or addition to the surface is called appositional growth, in contrast to interstitial growth, where you have the division of a chondrocyte. And here you can see these guys right here is an isogenous group. You can see the 2 nuclei just beginning to form that little bridge of matrix between the lacuna that they shared at one point immediately after dividing. So, you can't tell me, looking at this, whether this, and only with an H&E stain, whether this is hyaline or elastin, right? In this out-of-context shot. If it were in a context, you might be able to see some clues and tell me which is which. With an elastic stain, though, you can pick up the elastin. And the fibers in here are so dense that it looks completely solid, but you get out in that region there, you can see the individual fibers, okay? And again, as with last week, histofacts. I asked you to make sure you know where you find every type of epithelium in the body. Hands on, second verse, connective tissue, muscle that we're going to be coming to. All right? So make sure you have that wired. I think you'll find that with your book knowledge and some keen observation, you can oftentimes work out what you're looking at. And that's our goal here, to have you do some active interpretation. Here's a good example of fibrocartilage, which is a hybrid between connective tissue and cartilage. And you get a sense that there are collagen fibers, remember type 1, that are running this way. That kind of separate the chondrocytes in that manner. You can see that the chondrocytes and the lacunae are a little smaller than you might see in hyaline cartilage. In your slide, asking you to look at fibrocartilage, if you haven't figured it out yet, you're looking at a developing vertebra. So you want to go to the top of the slide and shut your aperture diaphragm down, and you're going to be able to see the collagen fibers there, and that tells you that you're looking at fibrocartilage. If you shut your aperture diaphragm down and look at the region where there's hyaline cartilage, because there's active endochondral ossification going on in that slide, you're going to see that the matrix of hyaline cartilage isn't refractile because you don't have type 1 collagen fibers. Okay, this would be called spongy bone. You can see the trabeculae that are interconnected here, marrow space. So if we're talking about bone, we're talking about 4 or 5 cells, right? Cells that are on bony surfaces could be an osteoprogenitor cell, could be an osteoblast. If it's an osteoblast, it's generally a plump cell, right? If it's a bone lining cell, which is just a quiescent osteoblast or an osteoblast that's taking a break from being involved in deposition, it's going to be flat, right? If it's an osteoclast, it's going to be on a bony surface, but the difference here is that the cell is going to be multinucleate, okay? And then, of course, cells that are surrounded and in their lacunae are What bony cell, what do we call a cell that's in a lacuna completely surrounded by matrix? Osteocyte. Yeah, this is a cool electron micrograph. Mineralized bone is black. Okay, so this cell completely surrounded has to be an osteocyte, right? Notice that it's got lots of rough ERs, so it's actively involved in making matrix. This cell right here is an osteoblast. A little out of context, you can't see that it's on the surface. But note that the matrix right here is not mineralized, because the first thing that's laid down is what's called osteoid. So it's the collagen fibrils. You know, it's all the organic components, which then when it's mineralized, we talk about as mineralized bone. And you can see, as Nigel pointed out, that these cells are connected to each other via these canaliculi. This is really cool. So high power shot of what we were just looking at. You can see, look at all these rough ER. So this osteoblast is actively cranking out the osteoid, which you see right here. And you can see little collagen fibrils. Here, this osteoid has become mineralized. So you deposit a bunch of calcium hydroxyapatite. So we've got some spongy or trabecular bone right here. We've got nice osteocytes. Not a lot of surface activity, or it's been pulled away, except for, look at that, right here. And even at this power, you can get a sense that there's more than one nucleus there. And you can get a sense of this resorption bay or Hausch's lacuna, this scalloping out that's done. And then one of my favorite micrographs of all time, worth seeing again, is this osteoclast that Nigel showed you in lecture that has been flopped out. So in reality, first, take a look at the margin here. You can see that it doesn't have this ruffled area. That's the clear zone. That's the seal that seals that cell to the bony surface, allowing the carbonic anhydrase generated protons and then chloride coming in with exchange with the bicarb to be HCl that's deposited right here. You can see a lot of the collagen fibers that have been exposed when you demineralize the matrix. Then you pump out a bunch of proteases to digest up in essence, the osteoid, what's left when you remove the minerals. Here's a higher power shot of that, but transmission electron microscopy. So here's your clear zone. Here's the clear zone. So this is the seal, and here's this ruffled border, which basically is pumping those protons in there, pulling the chloride in to generate HCl to dissolve that calcium hydroxyapatite. So this bone is what we call intramembranous bone. So basically the mesenchymal cells just within connective tissue differentiate to form this spongy bone. Right? There's no cartilage model here. You think about the flat bones of your skull, your mandible, clavicle, and your kneecaps. They're all formed that way. No cartilage model. In contrast, most of the rest of the bones of our skeleton are formed by endochondral ossification. Here we can see some embryonic muscle. We've got the epiphysis, this funnel-shaped region that supports the head, or is the metaphysis, and then the shaft down here. You can see that this marrow cavity has been hollowed out as you get down towards the diaphysis, the shaft of the long bone. But up in here, we've got kind of a bunch of spongy bone, or trabecular bone, all right? If we look and think about the epiphyseal plate, even though this is rather low power, the upper border would be here, and the lower border would be somewhat like that. All right, so let's take a look at this region right here, with slightly higher power. A couple things going on here. This is a secondary ossification center up in the epiphysis. So ossification is happening on the other side of the epiphyseal plate. Here, where the chondrocytes are just kind of randomly distributed around, it's a resting zone, okay? When they start dividing, they stack up on each other like a stack of pennies. It's a zone of proliferation. As they start to enlarge, we get the zone of hypertrophy. And as they enlarge, they start to calcify their matrix. When they do that, that's a death zone. Because remember, cartilage is avascular. Things don't diffuse well in a mineralized matrix. You need a matrix that has lots of ground substance and water. All right? So these guys die. I think I've got one more. Here we go. So hypertrophy, well, proliferation, hypertrophy. You start to see the calcification. What happens then is osteoblasts come in and start laying down mineralized bone on top of the calcified cartilage. And then ultimately everything is remodeled so that only bone is left. All right? This is an exquisite micrograph. So it looks like the distal end of the femur. You can see on the edge here compact bone, right? Coming around, this would be the articular surface, compact bone. Here you can see nicely the trabecular cancellous or spongy bone, right? A bunch of interconnected bone spicules with spaces between them. And those spaces in real life would be occupied with marrow, okay? Down here you can see how the marrow cavity has begun to be hollowed out. So look at that. You can see the actual scar of the epiphyseal plate. They seal up in your early 20s, so I'm history. I'm not getting any taller. Most of you may be getting a little taller. But as soon as that ossifies, there's no growth in length. A section through decalcified bone. All right? So we've taken the mineral out so we can section it. It's basically osteoid, if you will. You can see one bit trabeculum of spongy bone here. So this is probably in the mid-region of the bone, where there's a big old marrow cavity. Okay? You can see a bit of marrow here, red marrow, and you can see these cross-sectional circular profiles, which are more or less going to be haversian canals. Okay? In long section, they appear like that. So we're looking at a longitudinal section here. This is a section through demineralized bone closer to the epiphysis. And you can see nicely this spongy trabecular bone with marrow in and among it. Okay? Compact bone out here. If you take, you can look at bone by demineralizing it and slicing it. You can also look at it by cutting a very thin section and grinding or polishing it. And you can either put it in Indian ink or you can put it in a mounting medium. And if you do that and look at it, you see something like this. So you see these haversian canals. That looks like a Vulcan joining it right there. And you get a sense for the osteocyte or the lacuna that the osteocytes would be in. You can also get a sense, like, let's look at this osteon right here. So 3 or 4 layers here, central haversian canal, but these have been truncated because that's been eaten away, that's been remodeled and filled out by this osteon right here. So even though bone, aside from enamel, is probably the hardest substance in our body, it's incredibly dynamic, forever changing and being remodeled. And you know, the point is, as we get older, it's good to do reasonable weight-bearing exercise because it helps strengthen and keep your bones good to go. I think that's all she wrote.
Next week, we finish up tissues with